Let's meet today's panel. First, it's journalist, author, and host of our sister podcast, Jam Tomorrow, Ros Taylor. Hi, Ros.
Hello, Joe.
Ros, shortly before we started recording, Lord Ali he's been a key figure in the donation story surrounding Labour, and he is now under investigation over alleged non-registration of interests. So what do we know at the moment? And also, does this suggest kind of a more political issue or another political issue in Labour tying themselves so closely to someone like Ali, in that now if he ever does anything wrong, they're considered to be connected to that as well?
Yeah, the first thing to say is we don't really know anything. We don't know what the expense, the non-declaration is supposed to be. We don't know who's made the accusation. This is all unknown at the moment, so it's pointless to speculate. I think the only thing you can reasonably say about this is that whoever is scrutinising Lord Ali's declaration of interests is extremely keen to ensure that the aura of sleaze that has started to gather around Starmer and the rest of the Labour Party continues to gather. It's a move to keep it in the news, essentially, because it was beginning to move out of the news. There were no new exciting revelations in the last couple of days or so. This has brought it right back, but we don't have the detail for it to be very useful. The people who want to keep this in the spotlight are keen to carry on doing so.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how long that can roll on for. Next up, we've got political correspondent for Politics Joe, Ava Santina. Hi, Ava.
Hi.
Ava, you did a fair amount of tweeting about Liz Truss as she was speaking at the Tory conference. I'd like to talk about her as little as we can, really, in the next section. So, how utterly ludicrous was she when she was speaking, and why do you think anyone is still paying much attention to her? What's the fascination there?
Okay, so the first point, don't make it sound obsessive.
It was a little bit.
I was just doing my job as a journalist, but thank you very much for that introduction. Second point, we should listen to her because she is the former Prime Minister. Third,
for a little while.
But she was in that position. She's, more than you or I. This is why people never listen to me, because I haven't even been in number 10 for one day.
No.
Let alone 40-something. And third, was she ludicrous? I mean, look, I don't like using the term ludicrous on her. I think that actually I think she was a very interesting listen in that I had heard everything she'd said many, many times before coming from her own lips. And I think that that's very interesting in terms of where the Conservative Party is altogether as a whole at the moment. It's stuck. There's sort of a battle for the soul of the party. It doesn't quite know what it should be. It doesn't quite understand what it got wrong the last time. And all of that is perfectly played out by Liz Truss. I mean, she was saying things like, I could have won the election. She was, condemning wokery. Wokery, by the way, was the Equality Act. She's not a big fan,
of course,
of the Equality Act. But none of these ideas are actually ludicrous. They're actually played out, but just in smaller measure amongst all the new candidates that are currently vying for the position of leader. And when she's slamming the Equality Act, how is that any different to Kemi Badenoch making fun of maternity pay or suggesting that minimum wage is actually a strain on small businesses? Essentially, she's interesting to look at because all of her ideas, particularly low tax, are common features throughout the rest of the potential leaders.
And finally, our guest today is a politics professor at Queen Mary University of London, Tim Bale. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Tim, reform are also getting a lot of focus, and that is also a section of politics that I'd like to ignore as much as possible, usually. Do you think their importance is being overstated by the media a little bit? Are they continuing to be hyped up? Or is there just a big role for them in terms of how the right regroups to an extent that means the Tories can't just ignore them?
Well, I don't think the Conservatives can ignore them completely, clearly, but I don't think they necessarily need to be quite as obsessed with reform as they clearly are. Certainly not when it comes to, a trade-off, if you like, with ignoring Liberal Democrat voters, many of whom previously voted for the Conservatives. I mean, I think clearly, if you look all over Europe, there is a problem for mainstream centre-right parties posed by these populist radical right parties on their right flank, and the UK is just one example of that. I think obviously when you have a populist radical right party with a really charismatic leader, as you often do, and you have obviously in Nigel Farage, when you're having a leadership contest, I think that really brings that problem into focus, if you like. And the Conservative Party, in some ways, has been obsessed with Nigel Farage for some time. I mean, that was the reason, after all, that they chose Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party in 2019, because he was the only person with the kind of X factor that they believed could counter Farage.
Is it basically easier for them to keep on that lean right as well? We're going to speak a lot about why they're doing what they're doing, but essentially that idea you've suggested there of maybe going back to some Lib Dem voters and pulling them away, or maybe some more right-leaning Labour supporters, that's all a little bit more complex, isn't it? Just kind of leaning into reform and trying to swoop them back up seems a lot more simple. Are they a party that are just going for the most straightforward route to go?
Well, I think they certainly want some simple explanations for why they lost the election, and they've, very quickly lighted upon immigration as the biggest problem. If you look at surveys, certainly of Conservative Party members, but also to some extent Conservative Party voters, they seem to think that it was immigration what done it. Now, clearly, it made a difference. It was certainly the case that people lost trust in the Conservative government to deliver on their promises on immigration. But to be honest, it was not the be-all and end-all of election 24. There were far more important things for many voters, in particular, obviously, public services and the NHS and the state of the economy, as well as the sort of general incompetence and sleaze, if you like, of the Conservative government. But for Conservative members and to some extent their MPs, I think amplified by the fact that they feel that Farage has got this charisma, means that they have lighted on immigration as their current obsession. And in some ways, I think the concern about reform is all of a piece really with the way that the Conservative Party's been going since 2016, which is to try, if you like, to turn itself into more of a kind of populist radical right party than a mainstream party in order to counter the threat.
Let's begin then on a section which has initially been headlined Tories with Tim in my script, which sounds really like a very strange kids' TV show, if you ask me. The Tory conference was very, very weird and quite empty, but come on, we have to take them seriously a little bit to be fair to them. So Tim, we constantly hear about the battle for the soul of the party. Ava mentioned it in her icebreaker, there being this battle for the soul of the party. Is the issue at the moment though that it doesn't have one?
Well, I mean, I think that's what many Labour supporters would say and would always say. But clearly, there is a battle going on. Ava's quite right. I'm not sure, however, that it is much of a contest really in ideological terms, because as far as I can see anyway, this is, if you like, a kind of fully Thatcherised Conservative Party. This is not a party that really has a particularly significant centrist faction, if you like. Although, some people refer to themselves as One Nation Conservatives, they are for the most part still, small state, low tax, low spend Conservatives on the economic front. The main battle, I think, within the Conservative Party is really on these kind of culture war questions. And it's not always so much that people who object to the kind of stuff that Jenrick and Badenoch are talking about, in principle, it's the way that they talk about it. It's the kind of the tone, the nastiness, as some people see it, that they have a problem with. So I think it's on that kind of cultural dimension rather than the economic dimension that this battle for the soul, as it were, is being played out.
Does it seem as well, in terms of them being a broad church or there being something for them to gravitate around? The Tories have always been a broad church of a party with kind of a few aligned principles, tax, size of the government, stuff like that. But another guiding light, it would appear to me, particularly in recent times, has just been the pursuit of power. And are they particularly splintered because essentially no one involved in the party really thinks that power is particularly close in sight? So that one united goal isn't there anymore.
Yeah, I do think that's a problem. And clearly, I think that was a problem for them, under Sunak. It was pretty obvious, months into his premiership that power was probably going to slip away from them. And that, I think, didn't help him bring the party together. And I think now you're quite right. Although, the difficulties of the Labour government over the last few weeks have encouraged a degree even of sort of complacency, if not optimism anyway, in the Conservative Party. I think it's still the case that in their heart of hearts, they must know that it's going to be very, very difficult to get back after 5 years. And when, as you quite rightly say, the main business of your party is getting into office and stopping Labour doing all sorts of nasty confiscatory things, then I think that does inevitably, if you like, cause trouble.
When it comes to the membership at the moment as well, we're talking about the pitches. We'll get more into them and the individual points made by the leadership candidates. But we are looking in and suggesting it's quite strange. But actually, is it that the membership in itself, they were the people who voted for Liz Truss? They can be quite strange in their own way. So do you think the pitches actually, looked in that light, maybe make a bit more sense than we're giving them credit for?
They do, and we should remember, after all, that Keir Starmer promised quite a lot to the left of the Labour Party when he was running for the leadership, which he, quite quickly reneged upon. So it wouldn't be only the Conservative Party where candidates might be tempted to do that. Having said that, clearly, you are right about the membership in the sense of them being quite unrepresentative. Demographically, they are very unrepresentative. 40 to 50% of them are over 65. They're about 98% white. They are very middle class compared to most people, pretty wealthy compared to most people, tend to live in southern England. That's true generally, I guess, of our nation, but they're overrepresented in that part of the country. So demographically, they're quite different. And ideologically, they are very, very different, although they're not quite actually as Thatcherite as some of the MPs, not quite so neoliberal, if you like, on that front. Certainly when it comes to, those cultural issues we were talking about before, they are socially very, very conservative, and they are, as obsessed or nearly as obsessed with immigration as Reform Party members.
Are they quite low energy at the moment as well? Because we're focusing on the top of the party, but is there another concern really for the Tories that their grassroots organisation is pretty much in disarray? There aren't very many people who want to be going out and knocking on doors and actually tangibly doing stuff. And then another thing being, Ava and I were at the Labour conference in Liverpool and remarked upon how many sort of young men in blue suits there were there who wouldn't have looked particularly out of place maybe at a Tory conference during the Cameron years or something like that. So they've lost a little bit of that energy too. So as much as we can focus on the top, is the grassroots and how splintered that is also a massive concern?
Well, as they say, I'm glad you asked me that because we did surveys of the Conservative Party membership, and indeed the membership of 4 other parties just after the election. And what we did find was that actually the Conservatives do have trouble getting the members that they have anyway out on the doorstep, if you like. Now, we asked questions about how much time people spent campaigning for their party during the general election, and 56% of Conservatives said they'd spent no time whatsoever helping the party out. And if you look generally, right across from when we've been doing these surveys in 2015, 2017, 2019, and again 2024, Conservative members do tend to do less than the members of other parties, particularly the Liberal Democrats and Labour. So it is a problem for them, especially when you remember that they've got fewer members than used to be the case, and certainly fewer members in the Labour Party. And one of the good things actually about the leadership contest, as a nerd, is it actually finally provides us with an estimate of how many Conservative Party members have, because they have to produce turnout figures from which we can extrapolate the number of people entitled to vote, and therefore the number of people who actually belong to the Conservative Party.
You needed to factor in asking them how much time they spent on Facebook posting memes about proper bin men and stuff like that. Maybe that would have seemed like they put more effort in there. Ros, they held a lot of fringes called things like Lessons from Defeat and Building for the Future, After the Landslide, Lessons from Conservative Defeats, and The Future of the Conservative Party. But then they also had events like Liz Truss in conversation with Tim Stanley and What Would Maggie Do? Does it seem like a party frozen between charting a new future, but also just wanting to go back in time entirely?
Well, yes, and this is the problem that a Conservative Party is always going to have when it loses power and realises that in some way it needs to change. But the fundamental nature of conservatism is to preserve. And that's why it's even more difficult for the Conservatives to undergo the kind of scrutiny that they're think they ought to do at the moment than it is for the Labour Party. It is painful. In all 4 speeches that the leadership contenders gave today, you saw that tension between being conservative and being radical, and none of them managed to square that really very successfully, although probably Jenrick managed to do so best by trying to ignore the problem as much as possible. But the thing is, it is just too soon. The defeat is too recent. It took the Tories a decade last time, after 1997, to work out what might have gone wrong and to find someone who was acceptable to the electorate. And naturally, there is a nostalgia for Thatcherism because they always revelled in the idea of having a strong leader who will give them direction, they can follow, and who can sort out the factions that, particularly in recent years, have bedeviled the Conservative Party. But it's just much too early to say. It really is what direction the Conservative Party should or could take. And I don't know what direction it should or could take at this moment. So I've got no, I don't really blame them for not knowing either.
No. There was also an event that particularly stood out to me because I thought you might be interested in it, was can the Conservative Party restore trust in British politics? They didn't ask you along, despite you literally having written the book on the future of trust. Can I ask you that question? Can the Conservative Party restore trust in British politics? I assume you don't need an hour to answer that.
No. I mean, self-evidently not, but that isn't just a cheap, obvious political point. They did ask the electorate to put a lot of trust in them, and I think we sometimes overlook just how much. They asked us to believe that Brexit was going to be a great success. Truss asked us to believe that she was going to be able to transform the country too. Johnson, in his own way, promised levelling up and all kinds of other things that would make people's ordinary lives better. And all those promises were betrayed, did not come to pass. Really, nothing can restore trust in British politics. And it doesn't get much more complicated than this, even though people keep holding seminars about it, except a party that is honest with the electorate about the problems we have and then does a reasonably good job of trying to fix them. That's the only thing that's going to work. Tim, I want to ask you, Badenoch's bluntness has been quite a hit with the ordinary members, perhaps less so with MPs. What do you think might happen if the MPs don't vote her through and she doesn't get to the final 2 who get the members' decision? Will there be a lot of unhappiness about that?
I think there will, actually. If she continues to, come somewhere near the top of the polls that, say, Conservative Home do or YouGov do of Conservative Party members, I think if, there seem to be some sort of shenanigans that prevent her getting into the final 2, that will cause a lot of unhappiness, partly as well, because there's already a lot of unhappiness with the higher ups, with CCHQ, with the leadership, as it were, because of obviously the bad election result, because of some of the stuff that went on with candidate selection, et cetera, et cetera. So it will feed into a distrust of the centre, if you like, by members of the Conservative Party at the local level. You've already heard, I think, excerpts from the party conference where we hear ordinary members saying they'd actually like to be able to choose between 4 people rather than have, just 2 foisted on them by the parliamentary party. So I think that would cause a problem, but that can't be a reason for MPs to put her in the final 2, I think, because if they do so, they risk electing a leader who I think might be quite problematic for the Conservative Party going forward.
And you'd hope they wouldn't make that mistake again, yeah. James Cleverly ruled out a deal with reform today. He said explicitly no deals. If Jenrick or Badenoch win, is there a chance there could be a deal with reform in some way? Or is that out of the window now, do you think? Is there too much bitterness?
Well, you've had Nigel Farage writing in the Telegraph saying no deals. His aim is to overtake, destroy, replace the Conservative Party. But actually, there is a history of him doing kind of stand-down deals. And you can see that it might make sense in a first-past-the-post system for the 2 parties to form some kind of electoral pact. I think the problem with that, however, is obviously that it risks, I think, toxifying the Conservative Party as far as people who have voted this time for Labour and the Lib Dems. So I think it's a risky move, but I think in desperation it might be one that any Conservative leader might do. Actually, I don't think that's necessarily restricted to Badenoch or Jenrick, whatever James Cleverly said today.
How much do you think Trumpism, the modern Republican Party, that culture, how much has it got a grip on the modern Tory party?
I think the Conservative Party has always been pretty Anglo-spheric in the sense that it doesn't really pay much attention to politics outside the United States in particular, but also to some extent Australia and New Zealand, particularly when Conservative parties in those countries are doing well. I do think that Trump, to some extent, provides a bit of an inspiration for some on the more populist radical right side of the Conservative Party. But I think it is a fundamental misunderstanding of the similarities and the differences between the USA and the UK. I think that although we see ourselves sometimes as a very polarized society, we're nowhere near as polarized as the United States is, and our electorate is far more fluid than is the case over there. So I think this kind of obsession with American politics, and you can see it on the left of British politics as well, that all those Labour people who love the West Wing, is actually quite damaging for the Conservative Party.
Hope you're right.
Ros, with the pictures then going into what they've been saying, what did you think to them, and who seemed the most normal? It kind of seems like Cleverly's almost been a little bit of a, despite having the highest profile in some way at the start, a bit of a stalking horse in terms of just letting them say quite strange stuff and then coming out and going, come on, I'm here, I'm an option.
Yeah, Cleverly certainly wants to be seen as fairly normal. He's played that fairly well. His speech was better than I expected. He really connected with the audience in a way that, I wasn't quite expecting him to do. He seems to allow space, I think, for the party to decide what it wants to become. And I think it will gradually realise that that's what it needs to do. Because as I was saying earlier, it's just far too early to know what direction the party ought to go in. Tugendhat came first. He's toast. He was rubbish, to be honest. A really dreadful speech. Robert Jenrick was very angry. He was very on message if you were a Telegraph reader.
Although he didn't actually know the year that Margaret Thatcher got elected. So
he was a year out. Yeah, he kept saying it was 1974 because he wanted to make a 50-year link between it didn't quite work. Yes, that was a shame for a history graduate like himself.
Was that not the year that she was elected in our hearts?
Well, I can't quite remember, but I don't remember her being terribly. Well, I don't remember, but I don't think she was that popular actually when she came. I mean, Tim will be able to correct me, but I don't think she was hugely popular when she actually became leader of the Conservative Party.
No, she wasn't actually. A lot of Conservative members were very upset that Edward Heath had gone because they were quite loyal to him. So yeah, Jenrick did get it wrong, but it speaks really to the continuing obsession, doesn't it, with Margaret Thatcher that the Conservative Party and he in particular seems to have. I mean, we heard that he, I think, named one of his daughters, or at least her middle name Thatcher. Weird.
But why not Margaret? Why not Margaret?
Yeah.
Why was it
Maggie.
Thatcher?
Well, I'd say.
I've no idea. One thing, can I just say something about Jenrick's speech? I actually watched it on video, and I mean, he doesn't do himself any favors, I think. When he tries to do that kind of David Cameron tribute act, walking around, the hand gestures look really, really strange. They'd look okay, I think, if he had a lectern in front of him. And he has this weird kind of lizard licking the lips thing. But once you notice it, you just can't stop noticing it.
I was doing that as you said that. I feel so offended. I was licking my lips as you criticised him for doing that.
I probably do it as well. But then again, I'm not standing for the leadership of the Conservative Party.
Yeah,
that makes one of us.
Yeah, I think the last one, of course, was Kemi Badenoch. And that was, in some ways, the one I was most interested in because of her apparent connection to the membership. Has she really got it? And she didn't really have it, I don't think. She wasn't the fantastic speaker that I think she really needed to be. And she also said some quite strange things. You think with strange things the last couple of days and various. But she said at one point the government was there to serve the market. Now, I don't think most people in Britain today, well, firstly, they'd have trouble with sort of grappling with that idea anyway, and understandably so. But I don't think that people's ordinary behaviour shows that they want government to serve the market at all. You look at something like Grenfell and you think, well, actually, that's an example of where I don't want government to serve the market. I want it rather to do a better job of protecting people. And really, that's not what Tories have ever believed, because the essence of conservatism in many ways is to obviously, the market is hugely important, but to restrain it in key ways that allow it, that almost make it stronger. And she doesn't, I think, quite seem to grasp that. And I think there's just a bit of a dissonance between her version of Thatcherism, and as Tim was saying, they're all versions of Thatcherism in one way or another, but hers seems to want to push further and go harder in quite a Trussite way, which I think will ultimately be quite a turn-off, potentially even for the members, but certainly for most people in this country.
Ava, did anyone seem particularly rational to you, or anyone stand out for other reasons?
Well, Cleverly stood out to me because I was surprised at the applause he was receiving. I mean, that's really how we measure things now, isn't it? It's via applause.
Yeah.
But I thought he seemed measured compared to Jenrick and Badenoch, which we probably could have said before we saw the speeches. But it was just surprising. I mean, at one point he got a semi-standing ovation, halfway through the speech, which I thought was very interesting. Jenrick just seems totally all over the place. I mean, Tim there was talking about him attempting to have these sort of Cameron-like mannerisms. I actually thought he was almost trying to cosplay Blair. He was sort of projecting this new Conservatives vision. This is the new dawn. I'm recreating the party. But he was playing out the hits. So it was sort of like, starting up a new radio station and then playing the Bee Gees all day. He was pulling out we need to leave the CHR. I hate immigration. It's like, we've heard all of this. And then Badenoch just seems, she was throwing out quite a lot of red meat, I suppose. She was very hard line on a number of culture war issues. But there's not a lot of longevity in the culture war because it's not something that you can win.
Yeah.
But, in a couple of years' time, when Labour is still in government, you can't still be shouting about how upset you are at maternity pay because people will be bored of it. There's only so much you can keep fighting, and it's only so extreme that argument can get. So in terms of rational, I would say Cleverly seems to be the only candidate at the moment who's on a clear path of perhaps moving the party forward. Everyone else is sort of stuck in the mud.
Do you think Cleverly's got much of a chance though? Because we can all say he's rational, but do you feel like was he impressive enough to maybe convince the rest of the party to also be more rational and go for someone like him?
I think that you've got, Jenrick and Badenoch are two quite divisive figures. So you've still got, I think there's around 50, Tim, you can correct me, the Conservative MPs who are still yet to publicly declare who they're going to back. So if you're an MP who doesn't want to put your name to one of the more controversial names on the list, then you might go for someone like Cleverly. And then Tom Tugendhat, when he is eliminated, all of those MPs who currently back him will likely go to the other moderate, which is Cleverly. So he has got a chance to get into the final run.
This actually is a question from one of our listeners, Tim. I want to put for you. It's a bonus we do a thing, but your emails. They've sent this in. So this is from KJ. Who do you actually think will lead the Tory party into the 2029 election? It seems like the leader who will be appointed to be in post won't be in post come the next general election. I mean, first of all, do you agree with that? And then, is there anyone else that you think could be the one after this one?
I think it is quite unlikely. Just going on past precedent, it's very difficult for parties to come back after just one term out of office, particularly after such a terrible defeat. So I doubt that any of these people are going to be leading the party, to government. Looking around on the benches at the moment, it's difficult because we haven't really seen enough of the new entrants to make up our minds about them. And I'm not sure anybody in the kind of middle rank of the last government has particularly got that kind of X factor that we would look for in a leader. So, it might be that someone that we haven't really noticed yet could do it. It might even be someone who has not even come into Parliament yet who could do it. So, no, I don't have the answer to that.
No. And maybe Michael Gove will get bored of editing The Spectator and make a spectacular comeback. You never know. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Next up, Keir Starmer was in Brussels on Wednesday visiting Ursula von der Leyen. The pair seem to be getting on broadly, which is good news, but just how much is Starmer moving towards the EU? Ros, this apparent reset from the spring that we're seeing reported, what do we know about that and what could it actually mean in reality?
That's a very good question. And the answer, judging by the statement that they put out an hour or so before I'm speaking now, is not much yet.
It was like a bit of good vibes, basically.
Yeah, it was good vibes, but it was a bit of a nothing burger. Very significantly, there was no mention whatsoever of mobility as something that they would be discussing going forward and that was crucial to their shared interests. Now, that may well be because Starmer has yet again run scared of the issue, and we're going to talk about that later in more detail. But the problem was we had the meeting with Olaf Scholz in Berlin, which was all very good vibes, and but again, not much going on in terms of specifics. And it's all about the government wanting to reset the TCA agreement, which is the terms and conditions on which we left the EU, basically, the Brexit agreement, to make it a bit more favourable to us. Now, there's not much we can actually do because we won't sign up to freedom of movement or single market or customs union. So we are limited in how much we can seriously ask for. And if you look at the Labour manifesto, all that we were after was a kind of veterinary agreement, some help for touring artists, mutual recognition of professional qualifications, things like that. But the problem is that the European Union has essentially said you can't really have any of the things we want unless you agree to a youth mobility scheme. And I don't think the Labour Party was quite expecting them to be quite so adamant about that. There's also been a lot of talk about security, which everyone's happy to talk about. No one can object to security cooperation. It's a great thing. It's good for the left. It's good for the right. Defence cooperation, all that kind of thing. But can it actually happen, especially in the context of a European Union that's changing a lot? I mean, Germany has a lot of political instability at the moment. We don't know who's going to be in charge after the next elections. France, too, has quite an unstable government since the new prime minister was eventually appointed. So it's really quite hard to know who we're negotiating with, and that's one of the big problems.
It seems quite obvious to me that as a negotiation, there's going to have to be back and forth, and we're obviously going to have to give in on some aspects. So in terms of those concessions, you mentioned youth mobility. Is that about it that the EU is particularly asking for? Are they pretty much going, we want youth mobility, and that's the starting point? Or are there other concessions they're talking about? And then what's holding us back if that seems like essentially we have to do that to get anything else we want? What's stopping us?
Youth mobility is a kind of symbol of goodwill. It's not actually that the EU desperately wants it. It's just that we have no bargaining chips and they have loads. So it's a question of putting something on the table that we can give them to show that we are willing to work with them in a constructive way. And you've got to remember how bad the relationship became, especially with David Frost and in the Johnson period, and how much trust was lost between the European Commission in particular and the UK, and they want to get that back. So it's an opening sally, if you like. The problem with youth mobility is that in the Labour mind, it is mixed up, or many in Starmer's mind, if not the wider Labour mind, it's mixed up with freedom of movement. Now, youth mobility is not freedom of movement. It's essentially a scheme that says people under 30 can go to the EU or vice versa for a limited time, somewhere between 1 and 4 years, depending on what a deal would be, and don't get the right to stay, don't get any residency rights, and have to return. But it's still that seems to be unacceptable to Starmer. I think it's partly a combination of Yvette Cooper having come down very hard against the scheme. She is apparently worried that it would increase the migration figures. Now, it doesn't have to do that. You could exclude it from net migration. There's plenty of ways of doing that. But of course, if you did that, you would be accused by the right of fiddling the figures. But she'll be hyper-conscious of that. Starmer himself, I think, is not very animated by youth mobility. Remember, he himself has never lived abroad. He's not particularly engaged with Europe in the way that some Labour MPs are. I don't think it matters to him greatly personally. He sees more urgent priorities that he would like to achieve in office. So I think that's also a block, and that's what's stopping us from being able to say, yeah, we're open to some kind of deal, which frankly we should be giving the signals to. And I don't know if that's happening behind the scenes. Maybe it is. But just to say, we're open to something, but give us a better deal than the one you offered us last time, which just wasn't. We can't do.
Is Starmer kind of missing the emotional side of the argument there a little bit? Then I suppose, because there's this in your piece for the New European writing about this. You wrote that we stressed that we have to take the EU seriously. And is this that's what this is more about, is that they don't feel like we have. We've obviously seen things like Boris Johnson's book suggesting that Macron was bullying him and bullying us over Brexit and all this sort of thing. And clearly there is a suggestion of the sort of, it's not what you say, it's how you say it about the way we've negotiated with them. And is this something there Starmer has to make it clear that no, we take you seriously. And maybe that initially takes something which feels like a bigger move to him, and show maybe indicate that he can lose face a little bit to them as well, because they want to be shown that they need to be taken seriously.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the TCA suits the EU very well. They're quite happy with it. They don't really want to renegotiate it, right? They've got no interest in doing so. It's just a load of extra complexity that they don't really have time for. It's a favour they're doing us, because it doesn't suit us very well. It was a rubbish deal, as we know. There was a lot wrong with it. They know that. So yeah, we do have to make a gesture.
With Starmer as well, though, is this also quite a strange one, because actually this is a bit of an opportunity for him to show how smart he is. That's kind of one of the things we're constantly talking about Starmer, is that he's very, very clever. With this, he's got two things to play, hasn't he? He's got the optics on two sides to navigate, and then he's also got to navigate the fact that we simply have a completely weak hand compared to Europe. So actually, he does have quite the task of being really smart on two different fronts.
Yeah, he's stronger than he thinks, because his party is behind him. And they want to go further than he seems to be prepared to do. The vast majority of Labour MPs will be perfectly happy with a deal on youth mobility, and they wouldn't even, want to read the small print. They're happy with that. Many of them would like to be back in the EU completely, but of course it's a taboo nowadays mostly to say so. But it's become such a habit in the Labour Party to be afraid of a backlash from Leave voters, to be afraid of being accused of hypocrisy and promising what you don't deliver. And now that they're in power and they have the ability to move forward, they still seem inhibited by that mindset.
Ava, what's the feeling you're getting from Labour MPs that you're talking to about their stance towards the EU and maybe being more open towards it? Does it still seem like they feel scared ultimately, which in some ways does seem strange, as Ros said, when they've got a big majority of people behind it and quite a few years until an election?
I don't really think there ever was a fear from Labour MPs about aligning themselves with Europe. Certainly not like economically, or as Ros has just said, a youth mobility scheme. All of them would sign up to it. They rarely actually speak about Brexit anymore. When you look, just wait, hang on. Can I just go?
Of course, yeah.
From the end of that point, end of the youth mobility thing. If you look back a couple of Labour conferences ago, so at Labour conference, there's an opportunity for delegates to have a vote, and it's a sort of a vote on a motion that will hopefully sway the leadership into changing one of their policies. And for a couple of years, they had a vote on Brexit and changing the Labour Party stance on it, which would be to rejoin. That was backed by a number of Labour MPs, many Labour delegates, some trade unions, not all of them. They've been publicly pro-EU for quite some time. But unless now you're in a constituency, say like in the northeast, where there's the sort of failing Teesside Freeport, or you're in an area in the south where there's border controls, it's not really on your in tray. At the moment, you're thinking about the cost of living crisis. And look, we can make the argument that, of course, a lot of the economic the problems with the economy that we're experiencing at the moment are down to Brexit. But that aside, if you're trying to deal with the day-to-day, you're not really thinking about the EU.
Does it seem like, though, I suppose then in some ways this could be a little bit of an easy win, something like youth mobility that would make some of the the more Europhile members of the Labour Party quite happy and something that doesn't necessarily cost money, which Labour are constantly talking about everything costing money? Does it, this feeling that they're avoiding making their core supporters happy because there might be some other people who are displeased in certain places? And is it?
I don't think it's even about incentivizing MPs. I mean, I did a quick ring round before we got onto this podcast when I knew you were going to ask me this question. And honestly, most of the couple of people that I spoke to were like, why are you asking me about this? It's just not on their intro. They're not thinking about it. But the type of characters in the Labour Party who are thinking about it are the mayors. So Sadiq Khan, one of his policies, one of his it wasn't quite promises, it was a semi-pledge that he made during the mayoral campaign. He said that he would look into an 18 to 30 youth mobility scheme for people in the EU to be able to come and travel to London as a sort of Erasmus type scheme. Now that's interesting to him, and he wants that because he's got a vision of global London, right? London is very different to having a small constituency where you can't measure the benefit of having this sort of transfer of students. But someone like Sadiq Khan, it would matter. And I could also imagine it being interesting to someone like Andy Burnham, possibly even Tracy Brabin a bit further east. But if you're a constituency MP, I don't think you'd care. And just in terms of making voters or the base or MPs happy, you've got to remember that when we had this original Brexit discussion, a lot of Labour is made up of trade unionists, and trade unionists do not like the EU. They don't. They went very quiet about how much they did not like the EU when all of the xenophobia cropped up during the Brexit debate, but they've never been a fan of the bureaucracy. And actually, if you went round a lot of the general secretaries now who are affiliated to the Labour Party, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a Europhile.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that with Jeremy Corbyn. It's worth saying as well that youth mobility is not necessarily cost-free, because one of the things that the EU wants is the opportunity for EU students to study here without having to pay the huge full cost of tuition fees, which they currently do. Okay. They used to pay fees at the British rate. Now they have to pay fees at the international rate, which is far, far, far higher. So the situation many universities are in. Yeah. Some of them are possibly on the point of going bust, and they will want some kind of bailout, and they will want some kind of assistance if they're asked to take a lot more EU students. That too is a problem. So it's not just about happy gap years. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Ros, talk to me about fishing. I hear there's a fishing row brewing.
Yeah, fish. There are two elements to fishing at the moment, which are a bit problematic. One is that the TCA has a lot to say about the fishing, but it expires at the end of 2026. And after that, there has to be an annual renegotiation of all our fishing rights with EU countries, and non-EU countries indeed, like Norway and so on. So that means that there's going to be a lot of pressure from countries where the fishing industry is powerful, like France, like Denmark, to claw as much of the North Sea as possible in their favour, I suppose. The other thing that's kicking off at the moment is that the UK banned sand eel fishing last year because the RSPB made a lot of fuss about puffins and other nice, attractive birds that eat sand eels, and it said that decades of sand eel fishing had basically was destroying the population of sand eels, and the puffins were suffering as a result. The trouble is that Denmark, which does a lot of sand eel fishing, didn't like that, and it launched an appeal to Europe, and it says that is a breach of the TCA. So that is also a problem, because it's not just about the kind of thing that Boris Johnson riffed on, which is, British fish, our fish are British. It's about conservation as well. So that makes things even more complicated.
It's another problem eels don't need, as the headline I'd have gone for. Ros, any other EU points that you're looking at the moment that I should be aware of that I'm not, much like fishing, which I wasn't aware of until you told me.
Yeah, I'll be brief with this because I'm just going to talk very briefly about energy because it's incredibly complicated. You will not believe how complicated things like interconnectors and electricity agreements between and something called CBAM, which I won't even. That's just a whole other thing. But there's an awful lot of cooperation that we can do with the EU over energy. One of the things is an emissions trading scheme and normalising that, which is already in the TCA but hasn't even been implemented yet. And if we were to do that, and if we were to show willing, and if we were to show that we wanted to work with Europe to ensure that everyone has the electricity they need when they need it, and the gas they need when they need it, and potentially the hydrogen as well in the future, that would be another big gesture of goodwill. But it doesn't get much coverage because, as I say, it's hugely complex.
We've reached the end of the show, so what are the stories that have gone under the radar this week? Ava, what's yours?
I'm so glad you asked me this. Amy LeMay, who has been Sadiq Khan's night czar for the past couple of years, rather controversially because she was on a whopping £132,000 salary.
That's not much less than Keir Starmer.
No, I know. Yeah. And also, she's allowed to take donations. Her entire role is to go to various venues and be like, oh, we should keep this open. So presumably she enjoys a couple of free nights out here and there.
Yeah. It sounds like a great job.
It is a great job. She's also a radio DJ, so she's getting money from that as well. Anyway, nice. She's stepping down.
Oh.
Right here, I launched my campaign to become London's night czar.
Yeah.
So if you would like to see all-night pubs...
That's your pitch, all-night pubs.
I think the one thing I would really want to do as night czar is I love the tradition of by markets like Smithfield's Market or New Covent Garden Market, what would have been Covent Garden Market. You would have pubs that were able to serve very early in the morning because the men could finish, well, anyone could finish their work and then they could go to the pub, right? Because they all work at 4 a.m. I want to see them open again.
Yeah, this is the early morning pints at markets.
The tradie market pub. And I want them everywhere. I want them outside your house. I want them in schools.
Making lots of noise in the early hours. Yeah, I bet that's going to be very popular. Ros, what's your under the radar?
Marine Le Pen is on trial in France at the moment.
Yeah, I have seen these headlines and don't know really very much about it, so please do fill me in.
Yeah, well, she's basically charged with hiring European parliamentary assistants for her party, and they ended up doing party work rather than European parliamentary work, which is obviously bad. The important thing about this is that if she is convicted, it could see her barred from standing again and standing in 2027 when she wants to run for the French presidency. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that her party won't run. It will. It will probably be Jordan Bardella instead, who is the candidate. But it could well see an end to her being able to stand for office in France.
Which would be nice to see, I would suggest. Mine is a strange one, so I'm obviously keeping a big eye on America at the moment. But have any of you watched the film The Purge? So Donald Trump, so The Purge is essentially a film about suggesting that one day of the year there are no laws and everyone could be really violent, murder people, get away with it, and it would basically mean that society for the rest of the year was chilled out. Trump basically suggested that should happen. And he basically said that one really violent day could help eradicate crime in the US. And I just think, having watched the debate and people sort of acting like Tim Walz is very smart and polite and has come across well, that has just made people come away from Trump, who is calling Kamala Harris mentally impaired and literally suggesting the plot of a horror movie be a way for America to be improved. So I just think people need to focus on that a little bit more.
If that happened here, if we had that ability to have, any crime, I'd probably just drive down a lot of low traffic neighbourhoods.
Well, you just break the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit around London for a day.
No, don't be ridiculous. No. I'm not throwing all caution to the wind. There are some roads that I miss driving down, even though I know it's for the greater good.
Okay, well, fair enough. Well, that brings us to the end of the show on that law-breaking moment. Ros, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ava, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stick around for the extra bit after Demon is a Monster by Corner Shop, and a hearty salute to our generous supporters without whom we couldn't keep making podcasts. It's as simple as that. So why not join them for as little as £3 a month and get the podcast early and without ads, plus lots more extra bits. Search Oh God What Now Patreon to find out how. We'll see you next time.